All right, mate. Semi-final preparation. Literally just how many workouts you hit in a day?
It depends. I mean, because a lot of it is just accessory work. I
Mm.
mean, it varies by day. Some days is more strength. Some days is more like bodybuilding, accessory work, more metcons. It
Mm.
just depends. I feel like the amount of hours that I'm in the gym actually working out. So if I go to the gym and I bring my lunch and I take a lunch break, I'll probably be there for about 8 hours, including my break.
It's that's
So
a work day.
it's a lot right now. It's a full day for sure. Obviously, it's not like that year round, but as we're getting ready to peak, we
100%.
got to do it. It's got to
Yeah,
be lots of volume for sure.
100%. You need to go through periods of literally periodization throughout the year, right? Like there's going to be times where it's going to be a little crazy like this, and there's going to be other times where it's going to have to be backed off, and that's what a lot of everyday folk kind of look in, peek behind the curtain of this CrossFit thing, right? And we're like, people are training 8, 9, 10, 6 hours a
Yeah,
day, like all year round. You're like, no, like you can't do that. Like, the
right.
recovery is a thing, right? But for a period of
Yes.
time throughout the year, yes, these individuals are going to be beating the shit out of themselves with an ungodly amount of volume, and that's needed to happen.
Yeah. And that's definitely a learning curve that I had to go through, just figuring out when to ramp it up and when to back off a bit.
Yeah.
I feel like last year I was definitely doing too much too early, so that by the time I got to the point where it actually mattered, it was it was just way too much, and you just get that burnout
Mm.
and you're like, okay. And then you kind of have to try again and just have that experience under your belt to be like, okay, so this is how we're going to do it. And you just plan out the months as you go.
Mm. And you got to trust that process, right? The life cycle of an athlete, essentially. If you're taking a game season, so a year, you've got to trust that process of like at the moment we might be at a lower volume, or you might be at a higher volume. You could be like, well, this is my task right now. I need to do this because of many reasons, so I need to do this right now. But that's coming and that's been, and you kind of have to forget about it and just brick by brick try and build Rome, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's a whole thing, and I feel like you don't really understand that until you go and do it, cuz I guess from the outside it just that's the thing, like even when I was asking you like, okay, you know what's going on, cuz if you didn't, then I'm like, okay, how do I even explain all of this?
Yeah,
But
it's
then I was like,
weird,
oh wait,
right?
no, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like the sport of fitness. You're like, yeah, but what is fitness? You're
Yeah.
like, oh, well, that's a great question.
You do
It's like,
many things.
yeah,
Yeah.
pretty
You're like, it's
much.
everything, but
Like,
for
oh, so
sure.
you run on a track? You're like, maybe. Oh, you play
Sometimes,
football?
yeah.
You're like, No, like that's a different thing, and
Right.
it's trying to explain it, right? And it's yeah, it's a cool thing. It's different modalities, different implements. You see in these quote unquote gladiators, in the arena, essentially just throwing it down and figuring out the expansion of human capacity.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
it's a pretty rad thing to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder how it's going to continue to evolve over the years. I could always imagine certain sports kind of stepping back, like sports like football that are they're so hands-on, and
The
like
kitty in the
the
background. Sorry.
oh, Millie, hey. Oh, I have two of them. They're running around here somewhere.
Massive cat
Um,
guy. I'm sorry.
yes, yes. Oh, they're the best. But just how like CrossFit could evolve to kind of take over. Like I could see more like children and just younger people going more towards that, as opposed to joining a more hands-on sport that could lead to more injury. or it could be totally different, and they could just use CrossFit to supplement for the other sports that they do, which I also see a lot of that.
100%. I think that's where it's going to go. I think for the strength
Yeah,
and conditioning side, there's going to be some specific work that some athletes are going to have to do require, for their chosen sport, and that's fantastic. We're going to have to knock those ones out, but for the kind of base of the pyramid of the training towards these sports, at the end of the day, like fitness is a pretty big component of all sports, and I think it's going to come in at the start of people's training cycles. We used to have the kind of Russian old Soviet system where it was like, okay, you're going to do GPP, and then in 4 years' time, you're going to compete at the Olympics, right? And GPP means, you got to bear crawl, you got to lift, you got to run, you got to row. I was like, yeah, so it sounds like CrossFit. It sounds like
okay,
everything just kind of combined. And then you would then
yeah,
hone in and hone in and hone in. And then the next thing, you might be a weightlifter, for example, right? And then you're only really
yeah,
doing a handful of movements. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's how we need to approach training for sports now, rather than just the Olympics or World Championships, of actual
yeah,
like traditional sports. So American football, European football, like hockey, whatever, basketball. Like, yeah, yeah, sweet. How do we prevent injuries and also maximize the athleticism of these individuals, of these athletes, as well as them giving them time to hone in on the skill required of the game, right?
right. Or even like that reminds me of this book I was reading, and they were talking about. I mean, it was talking about recovery, but they went into the sport of tennis,
Mm,
and they were referring to Roger Federer and how for years and years he was the best, and they would say it was because he had the best skills. Like naturally, he was just better. And then as he started getting older, and he was like, "How can I keep competing with these young guys?" And eventually, he started winning again, and they were like, "Well, what's your secret?" And he was like, "Oh, I get sleep. I sleep every night for 8 to 10 hours, and next thing I know, I'm winning again." And
yeah,
it's like, because I feel like for so long people would put such an emphasis on someone's just natural ability and their
yeah,
natural talents, and then you bring into all these you bring all these other factors in, like sleeping and nutrition, and what are you doing on the side, their accessory work, and it's like, oh well, that's how you take it to the next level. And I feel like that information is so much more widely known nowadays than it was way back when,
mm,
and everybody has access to it, and so it's like, okay, well, yeah, you can be super talented, but if you don't implement all the other stuff, then you're not even gonna stand a chance to the others.
100%. And I think a CrossFit affiliate is a great example of that, right? Just go in, like drop in a standard class, right? You look at the work on
Mm-hmm.
the board, and like, we've been doing it for a while, and you might be like, oh yeah, it's nothing to kind of write home about. But you're like, no, like compare this to the rest of the world, right? You look
Yeah,
at the amount of work this individual is able to do, and you're like, you did that in 7 minutes. You did that in
yeah,
5 minutes or whatever. You were able to complete Fran in 5 minutes as a everyday person, just walking around. You're like, that's fucking mental.
yeah.
It's like, yeah,
It's
it's like
wild.
it's pushing the boundaries, what is possible. Well, we don't really know. You can have all
Yes.
the tests and theories and books in the world. It's like, well, we're kind of the guinea pigs, go out there, figure it out. Is it going to work? Maybe. Let's try.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting how it'll start with something, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, they've completely changed it. It's you're taking the same movements, the same workout, and instead of doing it in 9 minutes, like, oh, we're gonna do it in 6 minutes. Oh,
Yeah.
we're doing it in 3 minutes. Oh, I'm doing it sub 2. Like here, it's like, but you're doing the same thing,
Mm.
but it's completely different doing it maxed out sprint versus, oh, just do it. get a little sweat, get out. There we go.
Mm.
But
It's like Roger Bannister all over again, breaking the 4 minute mile. Kipchoge
yeah.
doing a sub 2 marathon. I remember when they
Wow.
were talking about Castro used to turn around and was like, there is going to be somebody running sub 5 minute mile and 500 pound back squat and be able to do both. We just don't know when,
Yeah.
right? And everyone's like, "You're fucking crazy, mate! Like you're
Right.
talking out your ass. There's no way this is going to happen." And then there you go. It was Adam
But
Klink, right?
yeah.
Bang, did it in the same day. You're like, all right, fair enough. Like, what else can we do? Like, how can we push one side of fitness and then also the other side at the same time? And I think this mixed modality way of training, this kind of concurrent training, like, I think it's going to be adopted in, or at least I'd love to see it be adopted in high schools. It's like, let's just, everybody gets to play around with it. This is kind of how we quote unquote train for the foundation. And then if you want to go do ballet or, swimming or CrossFit or American football, go do that. Fantastic. But we've all got this kind of base level of fitness. And I would argue it's to stave off injury and disease as a everyday person, right? Because not everybody's going to get the opportunity to become a professional athlete, or that might be for one
Mm-hmm.
season or 5 seasons, rather than a 20-year, or 18-year,
Yeah.
however long LeBron's been in bloody NBA. You're like, that's mental. That's one out of how many millions of people play basketball.
Yes. I like I like that you use the word foundation,
Mm.
because I feel like there needs to be so much more emphasis on finding just that base level of fitness, and then being able to expand on that and work towards something more specific like ballet or basketball or
Mm.
whatever. And I feel like you just don't see, you see people, they see that what's at the top and they think I want to be that, but then they don't see this whole other pyramid of things that they have to work towards first, and they immediately go straight into the highest level skills that you could think of, as opposed to just, let's just have a very basic level of fitness here. Let's just, okay, can you run a mile? Great. Okay, can you do it each day? Can you do 2 miles? Can you
Mm.
do push-ups? Can you add more to it and just build off of that, and just sort of have like that very basic level that everyday people across the world should have, just for that, for their own health, not
Mm.
even to be these big things. But
100%. They kind of they'll look at yourself, for example, and be like, how's she able to do that? It's like, well, you can't just take that out of context. Don't get me wrong, if we do, it's still incredible. And it's like, wow, this is an incredible feat of strength, pace, skill, fitness, whatever it is, right? You're
yeah.
like, yeah, but you're disregarding the steps taken to get there. Like, you have to be able to look at that and respect that in its entirety. It's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
she turned up every day. Okay, cool. Let's just work on consistently going to the gym fucking twice a week, right? Rather than
Yeah.
like, oh, I want to go 7 days and do 20 sessions in a week. You're
Yeah.
like, whoa, guys, I want to see you Monday, Wednesday, and then we'll work
Yeah.
on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then we'll maybe work on the intensity that you bring or the attitude that you bring. And, don't turn up 5 minutes late because you're skipping your warm up, or, don't skip out on the cool down and sort out the freaking nutrition, stop smashing Cheetos every night or something like that, right? It's like
Yeah.
those slow steps. And usually the results come a lot quicker than you think once you actually focus on the small steps. We want the results now when we focus on the big things. If you lose focus on that small thing, the big things come. It's just,
Yes.
you've just got to come in, tick the box, go home. Come in again, tick the
Yes.
box, go home. It's chess, not checkers.
Or even just being present every day, and just be, instead of just constantly living in the future or the past, just like, okay, we're here, we're in the moment, let's just do it and
Mm,
focus on that. But that actually, it reminded me kind of like sort of the 10,000 hour rule. Like
mm,
a perfect example is CrossFit. If you go into CrossFit and one person is right off the bat, day one, they're already kind of picking up some skills, they're figuring it out, they're doing fairly well compared to the class or whatever. And then someone who starts on the same day, they're struggling a little bit. Maybe they can't pull themselves up on the bar just yet. They're just, you can tell that they're just starting at such different levels of fitness at the very beginning. And then you kind of look at their backgrounds like, okay, this person did this and that, this person didn't do very many sports, or this person did. And it just makes me think of all those hours of accumulation that the more fit person has compared to the other one. Whereas not specific sports, because people always talk about, oh, you do gymnastics, you do weightlifting, you do track and field leading up to CrossFit, you're going to have a big advantage, which you will. But what about all the time spent just being outside, running around, racing with your friends, climbing trees, climbing fences? Like all that also is adding to your 10,000 hours that you're putting in before you show up, versus someone who, oh, I grew up sitting on the couch all day and doing this and just being sedentary. Like all that will affect when you show up, and just having just that basic level of fitness part of your foundation.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful point, especially relating it to the youth, and especially youth now, right? Because a lot of them grow up in front of phones and iPads or whatever, computers. And you're like, all right, sweet, that's fantastic. And that's a skill that they need to learn, but also give them a little boot outside and tell them to feel what mud's like and interact with the world and feel the breeze and run around and lift things up and stuff like that, right? Because you learn what this tissue that you're kind of bound to is, and you develop this proprioception, right? Like, it's I tell this story not too often, but I go back to it mentally a lot, right? And I remember doing a kind of an intro group. This was years ago, maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. I remember doing an intro group, and I'll never forget this. I was doing a med Barkley, right? And you're like, all right, sweet. You're just going to finish your front of your face, you're going to stand up. Everything was broken down. All right, sweet. We all good? Yeah, no problem. Any questions? No, sweet. Okay, fantastic. Yep. And go. And this individual places the ball above the red. And I was like, okay, pal, just gonna finish in front of your face, yeah? I was like, all right, sweet, yeah. Oh, no worries. Everybody fucks up the first one. Don't worry about it. I do the same. I was like, sweet, reset, go, same thing. Right. And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe it's my communication. Maybe they're not getting what I'm saying. Maybe my accent's a little funky or something. I'm like, all right, sweet. No, we'll try again. Right. So, oh, it's gonna finish, just right here. Like, sorted. Yeah, no problem. Like, any question? No, sweet. Okay. Again, they do it the third time. And I was like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, I was like, this has to be something else is going on here. This isn't me. And I was like, listen, it's gonna finish in front of your face. I'm not that pretty. You don't want to see me. It's gonna be in your line sight so you can't see me, right? They're like, yeah. I was like, sweet. Do it again for the fourth time. And I literally was just there like, I'm stumped. And I went back and thought about it. I was like, oh, this individual has literally done nothing. Would skip PE, right? So they wouldn't do any physical education in school. Has never done any sport, sits at a desk. So like their level of proprioception was so low that they couldn't figure out, when you brought in a little bit of speed, they couldn't figure out the difference between the ball being in front of their face and the ball being above their head. And you're like, what? How can we get to mid-30s, right? Probably plucking an age out. How can you get to mid-30s without figuring that difference out? And unfortunately, some people do.
Yeah. Just have so little body awareness.
Oh man.
When it seems like something so natural. Just that training in your brain of just moving and reacting to certain things. But some people, if they don't have that experience, then it's just not going to be a part of them, just stored in their brain. But
I actually had it. Wild. I had it again the other week, and I never thought I'd see it again. And like 7 years later, here we go. I had it the other week. I was like, oh, brilliant! Like, I've got a little bit of experience in this one. I can attack it a little differently, right? And it sort it out a little quicker. But it's I think it's a point that a lot of coaches, especially, um, disregard. You know, it's like we have to be able to create an environment where you allow people to try things, try new things, and fail, and try again. And it's like, oh, coach me, coach. And you're like, I will. Just give yourself some time to be able to figure it out. And I think that's what we need. You know, we kind of need to fabricate this environment because not a lot of people go outside and climb trees anymore, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or run around and play in the mud. You know, it's kind of like, all right, sweet. Now we have to create it in a gym essentially, and kind of create
Yes.
a this kind of fabricated playground.
Wow. That reminds, like, I feel like now as an adult, if I'm dealing with someone who is kind of giving me that same situation, if they're just not really getting something and I'm trying to find a new way to explain it, I have much more patience now. But I do recall times where I was a child, maybe I think I was like babysitting a small girl or something, and we're like out in the grass, and I was trying to get her to do a cartwheel, and she just wouldn't do it. And I was so frustrated with her because she kept saying, well, I'm scared. And I'm like, what are you scared of? And I was so angry with her because she just wouldn't do it. I'm like, just do it. And she was like, no. And I was like, oh, like I'm gonna shake you. And I couldn't understand like why she was feeling this way. But
Mm.
then I get older, I mature, and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, if she's never done anything remotely like that at all,
Mm.
she might not feel comfortable just putting herself in this weird upside down position. But at the moment, I'm like, what? Like, I just couldn't wrap my head around someone feeling fear about something like this. And I would touch the ground. I'd be like, feel the ground. It's soft. I'm like, I'm right here. I'll grab you. But I was
At
like,
least,
okay, suit yourself.
yeah, I mean, at least you learn that early on, right? Like there's some times where where we're like, come on, guys, just kick up into a handstand. You're like, and you just see these blank faces. You're like, what's the problem with you guys? Like we're just going up
Yeah.
against the wall. The wall's not going anywhere. It can take me. It can take you. It's okay. They're just looking at you like, I don't want to fucking do this. You're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, sweet. Like we have to be able to slowly lead them to Hansel and Gretel's house, right? But we need those
Yes.
little crumbs to be to act as a trail, like rather than just, all
Yes.
right, session one, we're going upside down. You're doing a bar muscle up. You're like, what? It's like, no, dude, like let's try and teach them how to do a plank or a push up first, and then we slowly start inverting them into a pike, or you know, and you kind of trick them to be able to get there, right? And it's
Yes.
a really cool journey to be able to witness. It's a really privilege. It's a
Yes.
big privilege to pay your bills that way.
Definitely.
And
And just like as that's happening when you're on that journey and just kind of staying in the moment, then you realize, oh, like I I did that.
yeah,
It actually worked. It actually happened. Versus I remember like whenever I first started CrossFit, and I would look at some of the things that people would do or how they would like drop into the hole to catch a snatch or a squat clean or something. And I would just think, no way. Like there's no way I would be able to do that. Not like that, not that heavy. And
mm,
then next thing I know, some time passes and I'm doing it. I'm like, oh wow, that there was nothing to be worried about and it's fine.
mm,
But beforehand I was like, oh my, like there's no way. Like how? But and it's just cool to look back and be like, oh, well, I'm doing it.
mm.
So
It's that whole thing of how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time.
yeah.
You know, it's
Exactly.
we do a really good as humans, we do a really good job of this comparison game, right? Especially in our sector in this CrossFit thing, right? We look at athletes like yourself or Fraser or Tia or stuff like that, and you're like, what the fuck are they doing? You're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, we're in the same field here, guys, but we're in different leagues, right? They're just
Yeah.
way far down this path than we're currently at, and that's okay. We might not want to go all the way down there. We might have different things planned, and that's great. But we're all doing the same thing here, guys. And it's like, oh, I can't do that, so I'm not going to try. It's like, what do you mean you can't do a handstand push up on the rings? Yeah, great. That doesn't mean you can't try and do a push up on the floor.
Right.
Like let's try and break this down in progression. And I think yeah, I think we did a really good job of highlighting scalability. It's for anyone, but it's not for everybody. People aren't going to
Yeah.
enjoy it. And I say, great, go do something that you enjoy. See you later. I'll be here if you want to come back. If you don't, I'll still be here. See you later. But
Right.
everybody can do it, or anyone can do it, but not everybody wants to, right? And that's okay. But I think we need to also do a better job of re-highlighting it, of like, okay, well, today I'm really bunged up, with your back or knees or something. It's like, cool, it's not a below parallel there. Okay, sweet. You're squatting to a box, or you're hinging instead, or doing something else. You're using D-balls or sandbags or shit. And it's like, yeah, it's all work, man. Work is work. Some days you're gonna go
Yeah.
outside with a digger and bulldoze and dig that hole as deep as you can. And other days you're gonna go out with a teaspoon. But guess what? You're still gonna go out every day and start digging holes. The
Hmm.
depth and the width of them are just gonna change.
Yeah. And so, like, 1% or 10%, it's better than 0%,
It's better
even if
than
that's all you do.
eating bonbons on the couch.
Uh-huh.
Although
Or even,
it
yes,
sounds it sounds pretty good.
even comparing like so when I think of working out, I don't I don't think what I do is working out. Because when I look at what I do, I look at it just as training.
Hmm.
That's what I do. And I see working out as a separate thing. Because to me, if you're gonna go and work out, you're doing it for the purpose of you're wanting to feel good, you're doing it your health, you're taking care of yourself, you're trying to reach a certain stimulus that you're trying to break through. And then your training, you're doing very specific things to help you get towards your goal and
Hmm.
to better yourself towards that. Um, and so like when people talk to me, they're like, "Oh, how long did you work out for? How many workouts do you do?" I'm like, I don't see it as workouts as working out because it's all training. It's not even necessarily just workouts. And like I'm training, I'm trying to better my fitness, but that doesn't necessarily correlate with my health.
Hmm.
Am I making sense?
Perfect sense.
So because I feel like fitness and health are not the same thing, and you could have one very good while the other is kind of so. You could be very healthy and your fitness might be pretty good, or you might be super fit and your health is kind of lagging. And I think if they're both up there, then you'll be doing very well. But I mean, I see people all the time who might be super talented in the fitness arena, but maybe they eat like shit or
Hmm.
they just don't take care of themselves. And then eventually their fitness will plummet. But if they're at a good age where they can kind of hold on to it for a while, they might not realize it until
Yeah,
later.
yeah, for sure. That's a great point. It's working on the rigidity of your foundation, and that's
Mm-hmm.
always going to be health. If it is the definition as we kind of call it in fitness of your your fitness, so work capacity across broad time model domains across a lifetime. If that is the definition of health, then we need to be able to elongate that rather than like how well can I do in this season or how well can I do in this particular workout. It's like, well, you might need to take a little hit so you can be able to increase your overall work capacity across your life, and
Yes.
what usually helps that is what we're feeding ourselves, right? We're not going to get in a petrol car and start feeding it diesel or alcohol. You're going to be like, yeah, well, it's probably going to run and then it's going to shit itself. and
Yeah.
then it's buggered. It's like, what we're gonna do next? And yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, this one's towards a goal. The other one is for health, for lifetime, and we need to understand what journey we're on right now and understand that that journey might change, but the underlying foundation is always going to be that health.
Yes. And I feel like one is definitely harder than the other, depending on the person. Like, I feel like, especially right now in my training, physically, I can always go do the work and I can always work to improve my fitness. But then the biggest chore is focusing on my health, which is just so much more goes into it as recovery and what I'm doing outside the gym
Mm.
and all things like that. And so if I can keep my health up there as well, it'll kind of send my fitness off on its own rocket up.
Yeah, you can, increase the lifespan of your professional career at the end of the day, right? If you're unhealthy, you might be
Right.
really good for 1 to 3 years, and then you're broken, literally, inside and
Yes.
out. It's like, okay, great. Well, if you can remain healthy, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, yada, 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 all of them's combined. All right, sweet. Maybe we can do a little bit of a longer career. And that, they're usually a lot stronger. The careers, if you look at their lifespan, so we look at Panchik is a great example, right? Gone to the games, what, 10 years just by
Yeah.
doing the basics. Okay. Doing the
Yes.
basics awfully well, build a foundation and then build it better at the end of the day. And you can't really look at him nor pay attention to his lifestyle, nor have a conversation with him without coming around and say, this is actually a pretty healthy individual. His um the way he looks on things in terms of his perspective, the way he runs his life, what he eats, how he trains, yada yada. Over a 10-year period, you're like, well, this has got to be a pretty healthy individual rather than just somebody who's
Yeah.
chasing a specific number or a time. It's like, no, let's focus on that, because the wider the base of the pyramid, usually the taller it is, and then it might take you a little longer. Great. But we're not going to be broken by the end of it.
Yes.
Or fingers crossed.
I I like that the wider the base of the pyramid, the taller it is. It's very true. I see it because I feel like a lot of people do get caught up in the numbers that they see
Yeah.
and they let it take a toll on them instead of just thinking, okay, well, I felt really good doing that. I felt okay, and just having more of a body awareness as
Yeah.
opposed to just looking at a piece of paper and seeing, okay, these are the times I got, these are the numbers I hit, versus let's get more details here. Let's see how did I really feel doing it? How do I feel now that it's over? How do I feel going into the next set? And I think that could be a lot more informative than just seeing, oh, I did this and I did this in 5 minutes, I did this in 10, and this is the numbers. But what does it mean if are you hitting those numbers every week, or was it just one time and then never again after that?
Mhm. That's it. We have to ask ourselves that question, right? And develop that understanding and of the person that we are, and then maybe we can translate this into everyday life, use our fitness in a mental capacity in everyday life. It's like, oh, why is this angering me? Why is this not working? How come there's a bit of a miscommunication or a communication breakdown going on? And you're like, yeah, okay, maybe you can start developing those mental pathways to then understand yourself a bit more, right? So we're not just these meatheads that stay in the gym and lift weights. It's like, yeah, bro, let's do this. You're like, okay, cool. We're not 16 anymore, guys. Like,
Right.
we need to be able to interact with other human beings. And I'm fascinated in the concept of how can we make better people from kind of slanging and banging barbells and throwing kettlebells and doing burpees. You know, it's this weird animalistic like way of living, but also how can we make people better? You know, how can we plant that seed for them to go water and then them go out into everyday life and just become a little bit balanced, you know, and open and trusting and caring and kind, and rather than just everybody's all wound up all the time. It's like, nah, how do we use this fitness thing to help people outside of the four walls of the gym? Because it's cool, you know, fitness is cool and sport is mega, but guess what? Like it takes 90 minutes or it takes 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and then guess what? Everybody goes to work on Monday and nobody cares. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we translate that benefit?
It's interesting how I feel like one of the biggest things we talk about in CrossFit is the community and how just kind people are and how well everybody treats each other, and we all just you get so close to people. Like if I saw someone walking down the street and maybe they're wearing a pair of Metcons or something, and I'm like, oh, they must do CrossFit. Immediately, I feel very connected to them because I feel like we just kind of have an understanding of each other that maybe not everybody has. And I feel like, and just in all sports, when you're on a team, um, for any sort of sport that you might do, you have that connection with people where you go and you train together, you suffer together, you have to be vulnerable with this person, and you have to trust the people around you to see you in this state where you're kind of just you're going and you don't really have anything left, and you're lying on the floor and all around